All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone for joining Ask the Patient, where we are going to gain a deeper understanding of how Colorado House Bill 1317 caused damaging consequences to medical cannabis patients, clinics, and dispensaries throughout the state. If you haven't looked up what this act required of medical patients in Colorado, not to worry, we have our blog that outlines the bulk of it linked in our chats right here. And you can go ahead and pull that up at any time. My name is Sasha Kelchif-Korn. I am Executive Director of the Realm of Caring Foundation, the global nonprofit located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And to moderate this webinar, I am joined by Bridget Serrett, founder of Act Now, a national resource sharing and patient support group. Bridget, you have been a leader in gathering our Colorado community who have been devastated by this bill that was signed just over a year ago on June 24th, 2021. And you have suffered the consequences of what the act requires as well. Would you mind sharing some of your story with us?
Absolutely. I have multiple autoimmune diseases, a genetic collagen processing disorders, spinal cord injuries, and all sorts of fun things that go along with it. And so I take high dose of cannabis concentrates. And when 1317 came into play, instead of being able to acquire what I needed as a dose every 2 weeks or so, I now am required to go every 2 days, every 2 to 3 days in order to get what I need. And for no other prescription do I have to do that. Me personally, I'm disabled. I can't drive. I have very limited use of my arms and legs. I've had multiple surgeries over the last several years. So I'm profoundly affected by my disabilities, and 1317 almost threw cannabis out of reach for me. I am very privileged and I can afford it, but the accessibility of just having to go every 2 to 3 days in order to get what I need has been quite a huge burden. And so that's how I've been very profoundly affected, not to mention the fact that the costs are astronomical right now and the selection is starting to dwindle just a bit. Today, we're very fortunate to be joined by Michelle Walker of Colorado Mama, and she is a mother of a patient with autism. We have Autumn Brooks, who is a volunteer advocate for us up at the Capitol. She has a child that is profoundly affected and neurological diseases herself, and all sorts of things. So she's here with us. We also have Jess Hogan, who owned a cannabis clinic, one of our only cannabis clinics that served pediatric patients here in Colorado Springs, and Jason Wharf, who is the executive director of Southern Colorado Cannabis Council. Sasha?
Yes, thank you, Bridget, and thank you for sharing with us. And we also have Steve Bond here from Realm of Caring, who will be answering your questions through chat in the Q&A. So if you have any there, he'll be adding to the for us to get to at the end or towards the end. So thank you, everybody, for joining. And so before we get started into speaking directly with our guest speakers, we want to first take a look at Nova's The Cannabis Question, which aired in September of last year. It took a deeper dive into the scientific benefits as well as the personal accounts of potential benefits, bringing attention to how criminalization takes place even while states are legalizing for medical and or rec use. Like I said, before we meet our guest speakers, we're going to show a quick clip from the documentary.
Americans everywhere are turning to cannabis, seeking relief from a wide range of ailments, including veterans like Sean Worsley, who uses cannabis to treat his post-traumatic stress disorder caused by combat in Iraq.
Our sole purpose was to clear the routes for supply convoys that came through, looking for roadside bombs that were on the route. I was on a mission, and we rode over a hole that was in the center of the road, and unfortunately it was a IED that went off, knocking me unconscious. And when I woke up, the medic was in my face asking me, was I okay? Could I hear him?
After his tour, Sean struggled with a traumatic brain injury and disturbing symptoms caused by PTSD.
For me, it's paranoia, insomnia, seeing things that aren't necessarily there. Shadow people, as they call them. Night terrors, dreams, but these nightmares were very realistic. If I was shot in the dream, I would wake up grabbing my chest because I felt the pain.
Sean's medications for PTSD had troubling side effects, so he got a medical cannabis card.
Cannabis at a low dose can help reduce anxiety, relax someone, and individuals who have PTSD that newly initiate cannabis use report it being life-changing. So I can sleep for the first time in 2 years, and I can go to the grocery store without being so intense and on edge. That's why individuals with PTSD heavily gravitate towards cannabis use.
Thanks everyone for watching that with us. And so the cannabis question, it's profiling the injustices that took place for Sean as he and his wife were arrested while on a road trip, all just because his medical cannabis was safely locked in his trunk. So as with all medical cannabis patients, Sean was exercising a right to personal autonomy in his medical decisions for alleviation of pain and suffering and preservation of his own life. Research has established that cannabis has legitimate medical uses, therefore making it a rational medical choice. Furthermore, it is ethical to really conclude that the right to autonomy must include the right to medical cannabis use as well. And the same catch that resulted in a 5-year sentence to Alabama prisons for Sean is the same catch that Colorado patients are currently entrapped in with the now data collection provisions that have been argued as a violation of a patient's right to privacy, potentially setting them up for federal prosecution. When we asked our community what questions do you have for the patients who have suffered these consequences, many were interested to hear personal anecdotes and what this means for businesses and legislation moving forward. And so we are seeking to answer those questions for you today. Bridget? Oops, sorry, you're muted, Bridget.
All right. So access to cannabis over the last 10 years has declined significantly, with HB 21-1317 making cannabis a truly elite therapy. We know the costs of using cannabis in any state are all out of pocket. They are not covered by insurance, and they can be very expensive, especially for diseases or conditions that require higher dosing. My disease being one of them, I have processing disorders, and so I need a lot more than most people. So for Michelle and Autumn, and I'll have you go first. How has 1317 impacted your family specifically? And do you think, since you work with a lot of families that use cannabis for autism and other conditions, how do you think it's impacted them? Has it made it more accessible or less accessible? And do you feel that we will be able to offer this to everyone, including them, make sure that everyone of all diversity, all races, all genders, to make this a very equal therapy for everybody?
Thanks so much for that question, Bridget. So I am the mother of a 14-year-old child who has autism and epilepsy, affected significantly by both. He has a myriad of other disorders that go along with it, but those are the two that really are the driving force for his needs. When 1317 was passed, we knew that things would change for my son because we had an extended plant count And that's because I try to buy my son's medicine, 3 months at a time, because he has varying needs. Like he uses a cannabinoid that's hard to find, CBN, and that's pretty hard to source. So when we find it, we try to get it, like we do with our other medications. The military will send us 3 months worth of opioids, not to demonize any medicine, but we can get any other medication in 3 months at a time. My son's use, because all cannabinoids are figured into that magic number that's used for purchasing limits, was going to be similar to Bridget's level of ability to purchase. So, we would have to buy it extremely often. We live in a small town. We're probably about 45 minutes away from our nearest medical center. Beyond that, let's talk about access. We can talk about cost, and that's a huge, huge prohibitor, but even just getting your foot in the door with a doctor. So in order to have that extended plant count, we have to have 2 doctors see my son and certify that he requires A, medical marijuana to treat his conditions, and B, that he has extended needs beyond the base level, which I believe was 2 ounces and 8 plants. So I started looking around after the bill passed, and the doctor's office that we've been going to for over 5 years now lost one of their doctors. So we were concerned. Now we have to go to different offices. And then we found someone and they said, well, kids don't need a higher plant count. And so I found one doctor's office that would write 2 recommendations, and it was going to cost $1,000 a year. $1,000 for doctor visits, not covered by insurance, not deductible from our taxes, can't use an HSA. I know all of these are very privileged terms, but we're just talking about cold hard cash, $1,000 just to get in the door. We're not talking about the $1,500 a month they spend on his medicine just to get the card. And we've seen doctors' offices drop off, and it's even harder to gain access. So to piggyback off of that, you asked, do I think this is going to affect how people access? Yes, we already see it. CDPHE reports the numbers of how many people have cards and the demographics. We've already seen the numbers cut in half for the pediatric population. I talk with parents with children on the autism spectrum, and they say, well, next year they're just going to get rid of it anyway, and we don't want to make that progress to lose it, or we can't afford it, or we don't have a doctor's office within our a couple hour radius. We have very limited pediatric specialists, offices that specialize in pediatrics, and we've lost even more. We have no access, and people in rural Colorado, if we're talking out in the mountains, they have no access. We're talking about driving 5 hours to get a card. So this really affected everyone, and I am still able to access as a person that is very privileged, but I've seen so many in the community that have completely lost access, who are disenfranchised, and this is definitely affecting those communities of color, people that may have some financial issues, and it's systemic, and it's going to continue, and I fear for what's going to happen moving forward.
Thank you, Michelle. Definitely, I've seen the same thing, and I want everybody to notice that our patient panel and this panel is not very diverse. And I think there's a reason for that. The reason is because it's not accessible at all. It's still a therapy of privilege. And we're trying to open this up and increase access so that those who need it most can have it. And unfortunately, that's just not happening. And it's leaving it with a specific type of person who has access. Now, Autumn, your child actually had to be taken off cannabis because of all of this. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what happened with that?
Yes, of course. My youngest child, who is autistic, 14 years old as well, was on cannabis and successfully weaning off of down on their pharmaceuticals, only off of one at that point. Unfortunately, after warning, sounding the alarms at the legislative level to let them know how exactly this bill was going to impact my child, I wasn't heard. And I knew upon the signing of it that my kid was going to lose access. So at the end, changing medications during the middle of the school year is not an option for them. So at that point, just before the school year started, we went off of cannabis. And sure enough, when the time came for what would have been my kid's renewal, I couldn't go to the same doctor again. They had shut down. And the doctors that they had before that also lost a doctor. And luckily they have gained another, and maybe I can go back and be able to still be grandfathered in, son to be able, or my kid to be able to get their medicine again. But again, I'm stuck in the situation of, we get back to the improvement, the drastic improvement. All the negative behaviors became extinct for my child. My child went from a DNF student to a straight A principal list honor roll student. The change was drastic, and being able to see the growth and be able to see the connections that weren't being able to make before, it's wonderful. And to have it taken all away. Since the time that we had to remove cannabis as a treatment, all the extinct behaviors have come back, to the point that my child decided that they didn't want to hurt people anymore because they couldn't control themselves. And their solution was a permanent one. Thankfully, it wasn't a successful one. But now we have to sit here in my home and have everything that most people take for granted locked up, because at any given moment, my kid could melt down. And I don't know what the result's going to be. I'm terrified to find out. I fall in the category of, we can't afford it without assistance. Would have been able to for the first time this year had 1317 not gone into effect. 25% on average increase on product alone. People in our position can't afford that kind of increase. We can't afford the increase of what the doctors are asking. We can't even afford it at the price it was before without the help of others. And any of the assistance programs that we're trying to start up to address this issue have shut down as well. There's nothing available for us, and we know it's there. We know it's a working treatment. We have to do better by our kids. We know my kid was doing better because it showed. In every aspect of their life, it showed. They were doing better, they were on the right path, and it's gone. The state failed my kid and many others like him when they signed 1317 into law.
Absolutely. I bet that's a horrible place to be, to watch him do so well and have this just ripped right from you. And I'm so sorry for that. All right. We also have this on here. And one of those things that I want to bring up, Autumn also lives in a very secluded mountain town. So getting into town to try to find recommendations is very difficult. And with Jessica's clinic closing and a lot of doctors losing practitioners, roughly 2/3 of the state doesn't have pediatric access because telehealth is not used for cannabis.
Yeah, that's right. I saw some questions about that in the comments here, that we did have telehealth, and boy, would things look so differently for us. It still continue that. Dr. Getty, who worked for me for over 10 years, we helped thousands of pediatric patients over several years, starting in 2013. She moved back to Virginia to take care of her father during COVID. And so she was able to continue telemedicine for our patients. And she would be willing to still do the recommendations today as 1317 is written. But unfortunately, she doesn't reside in Colorado, and telemedicine is not available to us anymore. Or we would still be seeing patients and we could see them from their homes. That was a huge help for especially our pediatrics, because having both doctors at the same time on a Zoom meeting, the family doesn't have to go anywhere. They don't have to travel for hours. They don't have to go to separate appointments. So things would be a lot different. So yes, I'm Jessica. I opened Vibrant Health Clinic in Colorado Springs back in 2010 when I saw the need for more quality physicians in the cannabis space. And over all the years, we ebbed and flowed with the ever-changing laws. But when 1317 was introduced, I knew it could be the end of the medical cannabis program as we know it. Personally, I feel that the state is forcing patients to move to the recreational market, adult patients that is, because the state can make more tax revenue. There was a recent article that came out last week that medical and recreational sales have declined in Colorado. I forget the percentage, 30-something% is down. So what's happening are people are going back to the black market. They can't afford to go, can't afford the physicians, or their physician office has closed. If they did choose to go recreational, which can't do that in Colorado Springs, medical only here, but it's just higher costs for medication and long lines for sick people that don't need to be standing in line for an hour to get medication when they're going to pay twice as much for it. So I did close Vibrant Health back in January after the new law went into effect. It's one thing to see a written bill. So we were very involved with this bill. We wrote letters, of course, it was during COVID, so we didn't go in person, unfortunately, but the doctors and I did write letters to the state. We got the patients riled up to write letters to the state. And bottom line was we were not heard, period. So it's one thing to see the bill written, it's another to see a new law implemented and then enforced. So on December 30th, the physicians received a letter from CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health, that stated exactly what would be required on the new state forms. Don't forget this, the bill goes into effect on January 1. So on December 30th, we're told what is going to be required, which we had an idea, but we hadn't gotten any information from the state, even though the bill was signed last summer. So they could have given us a little more of a heads up. So of course, as we feared, it's less of a recommendation for cannabis and more of a prescription where the doctors have to write exact product types and the dosing amounts listed on the form. So we were always a clinic that would give dosing advice, even when other physicians would not, for fear of losing their license. So the doctors were always giving suggestions on how much to use based on their clinical experience. This was relayed to the patient within their private appointment, within a doctor-patient relationship. So where the doctor felt comfortable giving this information, although cannabis is still Schedule I. But that next level of listing that information on a government form made us very uncomfortable. So we did decide to close down. I'm happy to go over, if we want to, in this webinar, how things have changed now that we're 7 months in. If you'd like, Bridget, I don't want to take up too much time.
Yes, please. Go for it.
Yeah, okay. Adult patients. So this hasn't been discussed much lately, but I am still in touch with patients through email, and adult patients must have medical record now. So that wasn't always the case. At our particular clinic, we always required medical records for any patient under the age of 30. They had to have records before we would even schedule an appointment for them. And so that covered all of our minor patients as well. Older patients usually have chronic conditions they've had for 20 plus years. They may not have that original medical record of their x-ray when they fell off a ladder when they were 30. And so now those patients have to have medical records. And so most of them can't afford the health insurance, one, to go to a doctor to get updated medical records. And another point is that many of them had been using cannabis for so long, it was working so well for them. As we heard about Autumn's child, cannabis was working so well that they hadn't even been going to their regular doctor. So for them to go get updated medical records, so a lot of them are telling me, you know, screw this, I'm just going to grow my own. I'm not going to try to jump through all these hoops. The other thing that we've touched on a bit, patients under age 21 must see 2 different doctors, meaning 2 different practices if they are new to medical cannabis. So we always offered the 2 doctors exam as a group appointment. So the families didn't have to go to 2 different places. They could just sit in the room for an hour with both of the doctors and get all their questions answered, get the paperwork notarized within the clinic, and they were on their way to sending out off to the state. So now if they're new, 2 doctors from 2 different practices, the prices have definitely increased. I didn't believe that $1,000, wow, for 2 doctor appointments. It is a cash business still, since it's federally legal. We always had to run cash businesses. Existing patients, so we did get this amended. So a group of us were bombarding the state last summer. They were going to make that across the board, but we did get that amendment in that existing patients that are under age 21 have already had a medical card can still see the same doctors that they were, or 2 doctors within the same practice. But unfortunately, many doctors will no longer see minor patients. And then we've talked about the travel cost and time. And then the limits, we haven't touched on that so much. That's what the basis of the bill was on, was trying to make it harder for young people to get access to concentrates. But that is also blocking access to people like our cancer patients who need high doses of THC to fight their cancer. So their caregivers would buy concentrates to make their own edibles to make it cost effective for them. But a lot of our cancer patients for 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams per day. A lot of them are in hospice care or home hospice. They're not driving, they're not working, but they are trying to fight their cancer. So those higher levels were needed. But now either they or the caregiver have to go to the dispensary every day, just about. So that's ridiculous. Again, I think that this is just driving people back to the underground market. The government will see that. They should be seeing that as the sales are going down. For minor patients, this just puts their parents in jeopardy. So you're giving a child cannabis without a medical card, at risk of losing your child to Child Protective Services, maybe moving back to another state. Maybe your home state has cannabis laws that haven't been sent 20 years backwards. So it's my hope that we can overturn this bill or rewrite it in some way so that we can serve the patients again. As far as what this means for cannabis businesses in the future, I'm pretty jaded about it, but I would just say move out of Colorado.
Thank you so much, Jess, and a big heartfelt thank you also to Autumn and Michelle for being so vulnerable and sharing your stories with us. We just really appreciate it, and your honesty and your truth is just gonna make waves. That's what we're here to do. And speaking of making waves, we also have Jason here, and as Bridget mentioned in the introduction, that he's the executive director of the Southern Colorado Cannabis Council. And he was one of the organizations the lobbying organizations that was opposing 1317 all the way through the process. So Jason, would you mind sharing a bit of that experience and what this could look like legislatively moving forward?
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for putting us on. I think we've heard a pretty good sort of round explanation as to why this legislation was such a problematic venture. I think I'd like to just for a second touch on how it came about and sort of expose, if you will, the ugly side of politics that a lot of folks don't see that us lobbyists get the pleasure of seeing. So this bill actually started in its original form. The intent was brought by Representative Caraveo to set hard caps, THC limits. And that was really a non-starter. That bill wouldn't have went anywhere. So she was able to bring the Speaker of the House, Alec Garnett, into the mix. And that's when we saw 1317. Once we as the industry, in the start of all of this, the entire cannabis lobby was very united that we would oppose anything that looked like this. So we were under the impression that the bill was dead, that it was not going to come forward. Unbeknownst to most of us, Marijuana Industry Group and Colorado Leads were working behind the scenes with Smart Colorado and Blue Rising and the governor. I'm sorry, not the governor, the speaker on this bill. Most of us found out, we got a draft leaked to us maybe a week before. That's not the way it works. Typically, we're all at the table. That's a proper stakeholding process, is when all representatives are there. The uglier side, if you will, of politics is, one of the questions that I've been asked a lot since this has happened is why in the world would the Speaker of the House sign on to a bill? That's a great question, right? Speakers don't typically run bills. If you pay attention to that, you may see one a year, maybe. In my, I've been working as the Southern Colorado Cannabis Council's lobbyist for, I guess, since 2011, basically. And I had never seen a speaker bill to this point. So, there's the old saying that politics makes interesting bedfellows, and Jess, and I think someone else sort of hit on this, the industry, and to be fair, not all of the industry, but a lot of the bigger players in our lobby are always looking for ways to increase profit. That seems to be their focus. A lot of you are aware we dealt with a different bill this year that seek to do the same. But with 1317, I think Jess was spot on that part of the goal was to push as many people as possible into the rec market. It's more tax money, on our side as an industry, obviously the profit margin's higher on the rec side. So there's a lot of faucets there. And then, from the speaker side, what happens is, the organization Blue Rising really took the forefront on this bill. And, I think it's viable to ask where the funding comes from with Blue Rising, because they came in, they were a gun control organization, which personally I probably would have donated to them. They made a transition to, the story that I've heard is one of their board members' son overdosed on heroin or something to that effect. And of course, we tied that to cannabis somehow. So they made that transition into this world. So, again, it's very hard to get the speaker to attach their name to a bill. So what happens is an organization like this that has basically unlimited funding, they can come in and they can hire the top lobbying firms in our state. And these are the same firms that hold the big fundraisers for leadership, the $1,000 plate, type fundraisers. So, to coin a phrase, politicians know who butters their bread. And it's sad, but it comes down to really a couple of things. It comes down to money, donations, campaign donations. And on the industry side, it comes down to greed. When I approached MIG and Colorado Leads after we found out they had been working with them, they told me, well, we were able to get the caps stripped out. Well, that's, to be very blunt, kind of nonsensical. The caps bill would not have went anywhere. That's just the reality. So, we as an organization, we're a bit unique in that, yes, we are an industry organization, but we've always done our absolute best to hold the line for patients, caregivers, and consumer rights, after legalization. So I think, not to go down that rabbit hole any further, but I think what we're going to see, it's almost guaranteed, we will see them come back and try to push the hard caps. on THC limits, whether it's this year, or whether it's next year, it'll come. We will have, thank goodness, Mr. Garnett has moved on with his career, and we will have new leadership this year. I'm optimistic that we will be able to maybe bounce back to the previous legislature. There were a lot of components that played against the progression we'd made with the current legislature, COVID being the biggest. Blue Rising and those folks were really able to get into the new politicians' ears, where many of us, like Michelle and Bridget and Autumn, who, we educate folks, we weren't able to do that because of COVID. So, they really had a number of Democrats and Republicans both thinking that, oh my word, cannabis is, this evil thing like back in the 30s. And, that's not where we want to be. We had been making incredible progress. Our organizations run, hundreds, dozens of bills, worked on hundreds, but, a couple of things that really in the last couple of years, we ran some legislation to allow folks on probation and parole to continue to use their medicine. We helped with access in schools, a number of great bills that we worked to help bring forward that were really moving us in the right direction. And the point to this is kind of what Jess alluded to. When I moved here in 2010, we were absolutely probably the best program in the nation. No question, access was not a problem. I myself am a patient, I have back issues. I was able to obtain FICO, with absolutely no issue. It was everywhere. So obviously that's not the case nowadays. And, we want to kind of move back into that progression. We really have, and again, to Justice's point, we really have to kind of chip away at what 1317's done. Now, I'm not going to say that we can go in as a lobby and completely, redo the entire bill at once, but I think I can, and I'm currently working on targeting some specific parts of that legislation that we feel, we feel the whole bill, the main points were just a no-go. But we want to start by targeting some vital things that could increase access again. Obviously Autumn's story is absolutely heartbreaking. Michelle's with the $1,000 for a pediatric visit. I mean, it does, it hurts my heart. I take it very personally. It shouldn't be that way. So those are the type of things that we need relief from yesterday. So that'll be our focus. A couple of cautions. I know there's some folks in here from around the country. These types of bills, what happens is these organizations, they're all sort of intertwined. We have Project SAM nationwide, and they all work collaboratively. So they have, what some call like a cookie cutter bill, which is what this will now become. So they'll take this legislation to other states, and I'm hearing they already are from one of our other panelists. And that's the type of thing to be aware of. And you really, and myself included, it's very easy when we pass medical or we pass recreational, you think, well, I've got access and, I'll take these breadcrumbs. It may not be perfect, but the reality is that that's just the first step. And to give an example, here in Colorado, since we legalized in 2012, I've worked on over 200 bills, and you can expect that kind of number in just about every state. So the point being, it's vital, absolutely vital to stay in the face of your elected officials, to keep pressure for them to do the right thing, to hold them accountable, and most importantly, educate them. And, keep in mind, people always ask me, well, how do I talk to them? That's valid. But the reality is politicians are people. And if you, sit down and chat with them one-on-one, just, tell them the truth and be who you are. Tell them your issues. Our organization, which I have to mention, Jess was a founder of, and she's pretty incredible in a lot of ways. We, one of the things that has garnered our success over the decade or so that we've been in policy, we're not misleading. I can honestly say that I've never lied once to a politician. And that became, for a number of years, we became sort of an asset to them because they knew they could come to myself or one of our other lobbyists or volunteer interns and sort of get the facts, like, hey, I'm hearing this from so-and-so, is it true? And those types of conversations, that's what everyone across the country should be able to do with their elected officials. And the only other thing on that point, is elected officials, another misconception as well. I can't talk to them. On the federal level, that can be a challenge sometimes. I will say that. Typically, I've worked across the country helping with different legislation. And on the state level, it's really not like that. In my experience, they're really very accessible. They may not agree with you. They may tell you to fly a kite and have a nice day, but at least you're getting in front of them and getting some face time. So, I don't let anything scare anyone. I know, Sasha and the Realm are amazing at advising folks. Our organization, we'll do the same. We often coach folks who want to come in and testify or give them talking points, or in another state, if you have some legislation coming that we've already combated, we're happy to advise you. And as I mentioned, we're all volunteer. We're a nonprofit. We do everything pro bono. So, please feel free to reach out. And when I'm done rambling, I'll throw my email in the chat here. And then just the last point real quick, because it really is a shame, and I wanted to mention it. So telehealth, what a horrible thing, right? So we had it all through COVID. It worked fine, no issues. The bill should have passed. And this again plays back into maybe not the pretty side of politics. What happened is when we killed the first bill, the CAPS bill, Blue Rising essentially told their lobbyists, kill all cannabis bills, everyone. That's how that bill died. That's it. They were mad. They took their vengeance out on all of you. It's sick. I don't get it. Personally, I think if these folks were considered or concerned about pediatric patients, we should focus on opioids. If we're being honest, cannabis has never killed any pediatric patient. Opioids do probably every day. So, that was a bill that we took very hard. Our organization worked with Native Roots on that. And I know that Shannon Fender, their old lobbyist, and I both shed a tear and a hug, shared a hug, after it failed, because it hit us pretty hard. We knew how it would affect the industry. So, thanks for letting me ramble. And again, just stay active and keep the pressure on every elected official from top down.
So Jason, one last question. Well, kind of a two-parter. So the first thing is, do you feel like the majority of patients actually know about 1317, or do you think they're still being blindsided by it? And then the other thing is, where can somebody who would like to fight this? We have a couple patients that are popping up in the chat, and I'm sure there are more who will be watching this later. Where can they go to find the information on how to get involved, or to find information on what's coming next?
Sure. We'll go backwards. Again, I think the Realm has been extremely great at putting info out, as their breakdown in the blog. I think Sasha said it's in there. They've done a great job, and they're always willing to advise. Again, the same with our organization. We welcome everyone to join, and as a member, you get to pretty much have 24/7 access to me. Ironically, we're doing a little website maintenance, so but I will throw my email on our link, and in the next day or two, that'll be done, and we'll be live again. The blindsided part, oh, absolutely. And that not just with this bill, Bridget, but a few years ago, another horrible bill, in our opinion, was the plant count bill, where we were all limited. Cancer patients used to be able to grow 99, and now they can grow maybe 12, usually 6. So yeah, the state, in my opinion, when we pass legislation like this and it's signed into law, there should absolutely be a better mechanism to inform people. And I mentioned the plant count bill because what you're looking at there and I'll use actually my old caregiver. He was a caregiver for 5 people. 4 of those were cancer patients and myself, and I had an extended count, and all of his others had 99. So this fellow was so generous, he had actually went out and bought a building in Pueblo and set up his grow and never took a dime. He grew medicine for all 5 of us, never, wouldn't even let us buy him lunch. So had he not known me, he would have had no idea. And we're talking about a 70-year-old man who's doing this out of the kindness of his heart. Imagine getting your door kicked in because you're taking care of dying people and having no idea you're doing anything wrong. So yes, absolutely. And you know, the more we can all do to help educate people on everything going on, we definitely should.
Well, thank you, Jason. As Adam said it best in the chat, your guidance and your knowledge is just incredible, and we really appreciate you sharing with us. Any closing remarks from our beautiful panel here? Okay, well, we don't have any more questions. So if you do have any questions that remain, I encourage you to reach out. Realm of Caring is here to support you with your questions about this webinar or your cannabinoid therapy journey in general. So you can call 719-347-5400 or email info@realmofcaring.org, and we can answer you from our care team. And then to conclude this webinar, we are going to have a closing statement from Cassandra Frederick from the Drug Policy Alliance, as featured in the cannabis question, and then we will sign off from there. So thank you to everybody for joining, and in the chat you can see that information for email addresses and how to contact Realm of Caring as well. So thank you to everybody.
It is past time for us to end the war on drugs. We need to legalize cannabis. We need to be pumping money into research to actually learn more about this substance. This moment is about building new responses to drugs that are based in science and that are based in the rights of people.